Oh boy. This episode was a lot. Currently, if you're keeping track at home, we are on the It's So Over portion of the We're So Back chart. Hi, I'm Bobby. Welcome to Culture Kitsch. Season 2, Episode 3 of Interview with a Vampire, entitled No Pain, which is just so funny for what this episode brought me, which was nothing but a lot of ground to cover. The episode starts off with Daniel eating. He's having a meal at a hotty-toddy sushi place, and he's kind of just, taking notes, rummaging through them, and then he meets this man who just basically knows everything about him off rip, knows the interview, knows what he's been saying. Like, he's just like, oh, you were off your game a little bit yesterday. And so now Daniel's getting panicked because he's like, oh, so you had me wired and everything like that. Like, Daniel doesn't realize, like, it's kind of like two different conversations that are happening at the same time with these two. Like, Daniel's like, this is like an MI6 situation, like I've been bugged, like the government is like trying to listen in. But in actuality, this guy, if you're familiar with Anne Rice lore, is a part of the Talamasca, which I'm not even gonna pretend like I know fully what the hell that means, but I do know from the little bit that I remember from Queen of the Damned, where they like go into it the most prominently on screen, that they're kind of like a coalition of people committed to studying and tracking witches, vampires, like a lot of supernatural things. So this guy finds him at this place and is talking to him, and Daniel's getting paranoid now, and basically he's just like, we're here to help, like I can give you a bunch of stuff and whatever. But basically the guy hacked into his computer and like put a bunch of information on the computer, and he says his name is Raglan James, which does feel like a made up name. I'm not gonna lie to you, shout out to all the Raglan Jameses out there, but that sounds like a fake name. And Daniel says as much. They briefly talk about the whole, like, the Great Conversion, which they only briefly mention in one part of an episode in the first season. Like, it's kind of something that's happening in present day. But we haven't, in the grand scheme of things, we have not spent a ton of time in present day Dubai. So all of the current happenings of vampires outside of Louis and now Armand, we're really not aware of as of now. So this is bringing us into the current state of affairs in the vampire world. And so they're talking about the Great Conversion, which is this kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, because I know y'all will. I know how y'all like to get. I read it as this kind of phenomena or shift to where a lot of vampires are beginning to kind of come to the surface a little bit. Like, there is a grand plan to convert as many people to vampires as possible. Because the guy was saying, like, at one point we were tracking 900 of them. Now there's like 1,400 or 1,600. Like, the grand conversion, like, it's happening. It's real. I'm sure Akasha works her way into that plan in some way, but we are way far away from her and all of those happening. That's just my general read. I'm not an Anne Rice expert. I have never purported to be. Daniel, again, he's a little bit spooked because they hacked into his computer and gave him a bunch of shit, and they are listening to him and following him. Like, he's not doing this as like a rogue journalist going at it alone. Like, he's clearly being listened to. And he's like a little bit scared. So then we go back to the apartment, and Daniel is talking to Rashid and Armand. Real Rashid, he speaks in longer than a couple word sentences. So, that's a big improvement for real Rashid. I've got this sneaky suspicion that real Rashid is someone too, in the way that fake Rashid became Armand. I feel like real Rashid is actually real fake Rashid, and he's someone else too. I don't know. Just off the glances and the looks that they give to one another, I'm like, are you someone? You can tell me. Are you some other ancient, old as hell vampire walking amongst us, cosplaying indentured servitude. Like, what's happening here? You know, you can tell us, you can say it. It was funny because at the very beginning of the scene, we see Louis sleeping in a bed, and like that's a very small detail, but like throughout this entire time we've seen him sleeping like in a coffin, and now he's like, he just sleeps in a bed like a regular person with a room that's like shut off from sunlight, assumingly. I just thought that was like a funny little like quirk or a little detail that he doesn't sleep in a coffin even in present day. Like, he sleeps in an actual bed. So we move on, and Armand basically comes to Daniel and it's just like, it was wrong. First of all, he says it was wrong for Louis to enter your memories. Armand, we go back and forth, baby. We really do. Because, like, on the one hand, like last week, I was singing your praises for the most part. And then this week, I'm like, what's going on? Because you being like, it was wrong for Louis to enter your memories. Can't believe he did that. Girl, you were rifling through that old man's memories too. Like, let's not pretend that you were just a very innocent figure in all this. Like, Louis dug deeper, but you were in there. You were skimming. You were skimming the files. Louis was opening the files, actively rummaging through the notes, but you were doing one of these. He was just like, yeah, that was so bad of Louis to do that. Anyways, I'm here to give you my backstory as a little sorry for rummaging through your memories, Pookie. Now we are jumping farther back into the past, still in Paris, from Armand's perspective. And he's basically just talking about how he was sent down from the Rome Coven to lead the Paris Coven, which was like struggling basically. And he was like, I'd never led anything in my life. And, we were having all these troubles. We were living in squalor. Like, they look like the ancient vampire, the old world vampire that we see in episode 1. And the assumption is that they are probably like feasting on, not that good blood, which is affecting their quality of life. Like, they all just look troubled. They look haggard, hags, if you will. Not looking great, not gonna lie to you. They call themselves the Children of the Darkness, which I think, just to level set here, as I understand it, this whole flashback montage is lifting from the Vampire Lestat, which is the next book in the Vampire Chronicles. I've got thoughts on them kind of dipping ahead into that at this point in the season, but we'll save that for the end of the episode. At this point, these are scenes or things are being lifted from that book. So this isn't from, as I understand it, Interview with the Vampire, which it wouldn't be at that point. Like, it just wouldn't. So they're the Children of the Night, or not Children of the Night, Children of the Darkness, which just, not gonna lie, kind of just feels like you're biting off of Children of the Night, like word to Dracula, but whatever. It says, like, we lived in squalor, wallowed in shame, abiding by medieval laws put in place to protect us from humanity. And this establishes this theme that carries throughout the episode of vampirism as a religion, and vampirism in tandem and opposition of organized belief and organized religion in that way. They seem to be kind of this weird offshoot of it. And they go into it a little bit later when you get into talking, you hear from the Coven members and they kind of explain, like, God's wrath and things like that. But essentially, these vampire rules, the 5 rules of vampirism or whatever, they are pretty ironclad held to. Armand one day feels the essence of something new, something fresh, something fun. And that happens to be Lestat de Leoncourt. And he's like, I felt him before I even saw him. Like, it felt like it was new and different and all these things. Like, he's very much so trying to act like he was not smitten from the jump. So he goes and finds Lestat, and he's basically in this play, kind of playing this like Harlequin character. And it's very interesting because I saw a quote from an interview that Sam Reed did where he says that he always played Lestat as a bit of a clown. And I imagine, I think in season 1 as well, where he's like this kind of like upper echelon type of clown, but a clown nonetheless. So you see that in full detail in this scene, and it's all in French. Armand sees Lestat, and he's like in a box, and Lestat is on stage, and so Armand is doing his thing. He's like telepathically talking to him, and he was just like, hey, and I think you should like come with me because I can protect you and I can teach you, and can I think you're cute or whatever. So yeah, you can come with me. I'm a vampire too. I'm old as hell. I know the person who made you, funnily enough, and he's probably dead at this point, right? So yeah, just come to me. Come with me. We'll go at this thing together. And Lestat's on stage, and he can like kind of hear Armand like in his mind, obviously, and he's speaking back to him. And he basically rejects Armand's advances in the early goings. And all of these vampires have that in common. But specifically with Armand, it very much so mirrored what's like happening now with Louis and Armand, or happening in Paris a little bit farther in time, where both Louis and Lestat definitely like reject the advances of Armand, and more so are rejecting the advances of being in a coven. Like they both don't like that. Jacob Anderson in a couple episodes back said something to the effect of like, Louis is someone who needs to know the community is there but not necessarily be a part of it. And I feel like Lestat is also kind of the same. But Lestat's that in a much more like abrasive kind of way, where he does need to know community is there, but he also actively rejects it in a lot of ways, which is so very funny. When we see Lestat, okay, so this week on Twitter, if you don't follow me on Twitter, you should, or don't, it's fine. And this week on Twitter, I was tweeting that in present day, Lestat is absolutely a guy on Broadway who like does film and TV every once in a while, but he also like goes viral for being like a hot dude on Broadway. That's what I said he would be doing in this current day. And I got to do a little bit of a pickle with some people. I wouldn't say it was an argument because at the end of the day, it's not that fucking serious. But like, I was standing 10 toes down on this because in the books, in the Vampire Lestat is like current day, like a rock star. And for when Anne Rice wrote that book, that makes sense as a job that Lestat would have that courts in a lot of people, and ultimately he is able to seduce and bring in and be alluring to large swaths of people at the same time with this certain sense of theatricality, right? Like that would be what he would be doing. So at that time when she wrote the book, that makes sense. But however, I was just saying that the idea of the rock star as a pop cultural archetype doesn't quite exist in the same way as it did then as it does now. So I would say like now, if we're adapting it to 2022, which present day of the show is set, he would be on Broadway because Broadway has become a lot more pop culturally pervasive. A Broadway star has a lot more pop culture crossover now than they might have in the past. So that was all I was saying. And this scene, I'm sorry, this scene only affirmed that that belief for me. I could not look at that man and be like, oh yeah, he would hate being on Broadway, or he just wouldn't be on Broadway in present day. Look at him. He has chronic chorus line 5, 6, 7, 8. Like that is him at all times. I don't care what anyone says. That man will be on Broadway in present day. It's a joke. Haha, laugh. It's funny. Let's move on. We leave that theater, and Armand is basically saying that, for all of this time, he was chasing Lestat, and he was trying to, get him into the Coven, but also kind of like move in on him and everything like that. And the Coven was growing a little bit envious of the way in which Lestat could kind of just be an autonomous free will vampire, and didn't have to be in a Coven. Like he actively rejected it. And so the way for Armand to kind of keep everyone in line is to get Lestat to kind of join the ranks. So we see Lestat walking down the street, and he's walking down the street with his human lover. which Armand says is like heresy because that's one of the vampire laws. Like you can't really like fraternize with humans in that way. So his human lover's name is Nikki, and they're walking down the street, and he's like, "Oh, do you hear that?" Nikki's like, "No, I don't." And then all of a sudden, Armand shows up, and he's like, "Basically, I've had enough of you." And so he like. He like flings him up against the wall and like stops time all around him and basically just shows him the depths of what the dark gift has afforded him. You know, like he's got all these powers and things like that. He's got the power of fire. He's got the power of like mind manipulation. Like he can do a lot of shit. And I think there's a bit of Lestat that's like, I didn't know we could do all that. Like, how did you learn to do all that? I want to know how to do all that. And we see that later affirmed in in a different scene. But he's like obviously rejecting it, and he's very like I don't want to do this. But Armand basically kind of, because Nikki is human, he like pummels him a little bit and just takes his body and tells Lestat, like, if you want your human lover boy, you're gonna need to come to the Coven, like come and retrieve him from the Coven. In the scene in the theater, Armand says something to the effect of like, you know, I had to control him by any means. I had to bring him under my control by any means. And I do think that this speaks to kind of how Armand is and how he loves, which is like he wants to know that he owns his toys before he plays with them. Like he wants to know, and I think deep down he wants to know that like if I have someone under my control, they're in my coven, they're bound by these laws that we are all abiding by, they can't leave me. And I think he's got some abandonment issues, as does every fucking body else in this show, not gonna lie to you. But I think that's kind of where that comes from, and we can see it a little bit with, or see it a lot bit in a lot of cases with Louis as well. So when he said that, I was like, interesting. So he also says come to me, which lets me know that Lestat has basically kind of bit off Armand bar for bar when it comes to new people that he meets or like new lovers that he wants to take. Like Armand is the one who says come to me. Armand is the one who, you know, wants to show him all that vampirism has to offer and all these things, you know, like be my companion, like I'm not going to harm you and all this stuff. And it definitely mirrors how Lestat was in episode 1 of season 1 when he was pulling in Louis, you know, and also like the song of the show with Lestat trying to lure Louis back in being called Come to Me. You can definitely see how Lestat saw how alluring and intoxicating Armand could be and wanted to kind of like replicate that for himself. But we see kind of where he falters with that, because Armand brings people in and does educate them on the ways of the vampire and the rules of the vampire, sometimes to a fault. And Lestat didn't do none of that. He didn't do none of that shit. He kept making vampires and not telling them anything. Like he had no interest in being a coven leader in America. He had no interest in starting his own coven. He just wanted to kind of move about freely. But when you're making these new vampires, like there does have to be, I guess, some semblance of law and order to the whole kit and caboodle. I also wrote down that like Armand in a way reminds me of Mother Gothel from Tangled in how he treats the coven, in that he kind of tells them, you know, the outside world is so scary and, you know, you're much safer here with mommy. Don't ever ask to leave this tower again. Like, it feels like he's going to sing Mother Knows Best at a certain point. Like, that's kind of... That's kind of how he treats the coven, even if he may not believe that for himself. How long have I been talking? Oh my God, I've been talking for 30 minutes. I thought I was going to have nothing to say about this episode. Let's move on. Lestat goes and retrieves Nikki from Armand in the coven, and he basically shows up with like a big cross with Jesus on it, I guess to scare the other vampires in the coven. And they're basically like, the other vampires say like, you know, we serve God through Satan, through Armand, as was intended. And, you know, like, oh, your sins will incur the wrath of God. Like they're saying this to Lestat, who has a very just like lackadaisical view of this. Like he's just like, oh, that doesn't, why would I care about the wrath of God? I am a God. And he ends up saying that he's like, we are gods. We are the gods. Like, why are you being suppressed and bound by these invisible God? Like, we are the gods. We move about the earth. The humans fear us in the way that they fear God. So why would you serve someone who you have the same power as, which is what Lestat was saying. And then Daniel to Armand in present day, it's just like, you let him in and let him do that. And like, then Lestat like retrieves Nikki and like takes them and everything like that. And Armand is saying like, he said everything I've been wanting to say, or I had been thinking for decades at that point. I was thinking that, but they wouldn't believe me if I said all of that. Like, they wouldn't listen to me. So it had to be an outsider telling them that and ultimately freeing them to move about and do whatever. And I had to let him go pretty much. Because at one point, Lestat, he says the wooden Jesus that he's holding, he like, he like does like a... And then at a certain point, he drops it and it shatters. And all the vampires are like, oh, like, how could you do that? Like, you're gonna, God's gonna be real angry at you and everything like that. And then Lestat gets into, you have given meaning to this wood, but this is just a fallen tree. Like, the same wood that made this cross that you revere is the same wood that made that leg on that table or that flute that you have. Like, why do you care about this shit? Like, we're vampires. We're gods ourselves. Like, go out, be a god. And it just, it was like Lestat on becoming a god in Paris. Like, that was very much him. He was just like, why do we care? Let's just go out, kill people. That's what we do. That's who we are. Be that. And I guess to a certain extent he's got a point, because Armand let the Coven go, and he said that some members of the Coven struggled with the life that they had lived within the Coven under Armand and the life that Lestat told them was possible, and they ended up ending their existence. And he was just basically like, some of them really struggled with life outside of the Coven. Like, they kind of, I guess, to insinuate that they needed it to live with that much, I guess, free will was too much for them. And so they ended their existence, but not everyone did. After all that is taking place, Lestat comes back to Armand, and he's just like, hey, you remember when we were out on the street that night and you like lifted me up off the ground and like flung me against the wall and did a bunch of other cool shit? I want to learn how to do that. I want to know how you did that, because that would be very cool to me. He's just like, so I know I like destroyed your coven and all, but could you teach me how to do all that cool shit that you did? And Armand is like, I guess, yeah. And Lestat comes and kind of like tries to seduce him into giving him the information, and he like drinks Armand's blood, and then that's when Armand is like, oh, you tried to turn Nikki, didn't you? And he was like, it didn't work, didn't it? And like, Lestat isn't really saying anything. Armand's like, oh, he was too fragile. And I'm imagining that the same thing that happened with the old world vampire when she was trying to turn people, the same thing would happen with Lestat, but Lestat is just not as strong as Armand. So obviously Nikki wasn't going to be turned effectively. So Lestat is like, no, he will survive it, and he will thrive. And I think the thought that I had was that Lestat went to Armand to drink his blood so that his blood would be in him, so that he could maybe finish turning Nikki. Like, some of Armand's blood would assist in being able to do that. And Armand does tell him, like, because you have the blood of, I think, Marius, who is Lestat's maker, you in turn will like get stronger, and you will have these like gifts and abilities and all these things. Like, it'll come in time. That worked, and Lestat, with Armand's blood inside of him, was able to turn Nikki, or at a later point Armand was able to fully turn Nikki. I'm not really sure. I don't think it's that big of a detail in the grand scheme of the story, but that's just what we see, because eventually we do see Nikki as a vampire, but we don't really know what happens to him. So then they cut to the theater again, and Lestat's on stage, and him and Armand are talking, and that's just basically when they conceive the idea of the Théâtre des Vampires. Lestat's idea is that, these people come in and they bring their partners, and they're willfully seduced by the theater. They see Macbeth's knife poison him, but they know that the actual actor who's playing the role is not dead. So basically, we could do the same thing, but we actually do kill people. And he's got a point there. They could do that because I guess that's just the power of the theater or whatever it is. But like, I understand what he's saying. He's just basically like, we could do that like in front of people and it could be successful. And then it was. And so they did it and started it up. And then we see Lestat and Armand in a box, and they're just talking about, how successful the idea has been and all these things. And Lestat tries to start seducing Armand in front of Nikki, who's like in the pit playing. He's gonna be in the pit. He's in the pit playing the violin, and he can see, like, he's looking up and he can see Lestat and Armand kind of canoodling with each other. And so that just shows that, Lestat kind of, the assumption is that Lestat just kind of abandoned Nikki and moved on to someone else, discarded him like an unwanted toy, and moved on to his shiny new toy, which is Armand. But then we cut back to present day. It's kind of like a fade to black moment, and Daniel's like, that's it? Like, what else happened after that? And then this is when Louis comes in and basically says, like, they fucked on the ground, and then Armand taught him the mind gift, and then a week later Lestat was gone. Like, he abandoned the Coven, he abandoned Nikki, he abandoned all of them. And then Louis was like, Lestat will always be for and about Lestat. And then Daniel says something, oh, he clocked it so bad, and Louis couldn't do nothing but just sit and take it. Daniel said, never tell a raging narcissist you love him. And all Louis Lupin du Lac dead weight had to do was sit and take it, because you said I love you to Lestat, and so did Armand. Y'all both knew what it was, and you still did it anyways. Because in that scene with Armand and Lestat also, like, Armand is the first one to say I love you, and then Lestat is like, yes, and I love you as well. He couldn't just say I love you too in a normal way. Of course, it's Lestat. Why would he do that? No, but last thing, Armand, when he stopped talking and Daniel was like, that's it, Armand, let me tell you something, he got lost. I know that look. When you're remembering a time when you might have gotten folded up like a pretzel and you're going back to that moment. That was Armand in that moment. He was like, that's it, baby. Live in the fantasy. Live in it. It's your memory. You can go back there as much as you want. But I knew that look. I was like, reminiscing. I got your number. So we cut back to Paris with Louis and Claudia. And they're basically, every time they're interacting in this episode, they're just trying to get their full story straight on who their maker is, where they met him, their story and everything. So if someone were to ask him, or more importantly, if someone was to go into either of their minds, they would see that story. And so that's kind of how they are protecting themselves essentially from the Coven ever finding out the truth of their origin, pretty much. And because Claudia kind of blurted out the name Bruce and just said that was who their maker was and everything, she has to talk in more detail about what happened with her and Bruce, just to provide detail for Louis. As Louis asks, like, oh, what did he look like? And she's like, at first she's hesitant, she doesn't want to say. And then eventually she describes him, and, he's like, only pry because I want to keep us safe, and I'm only asking these things so that we can basically have our story straight. And, Claudia's just like, I remember what I remember, and what I don't, like, basically, like, get off my back. And then at that moment we see her, she's like getting ready to go to the theater, because it's at this point she's kind of like an unpaid intern at the theater. Like, she's in a hazing period with them, and she, like, we see her putting on the lipstick and she's like shaking, and you could tell just the thought of having to go back to those memories of what happened to her are debilitating. And it was incredibly rough to see, and later in the episode we get an equally rough to see and hear scene, and so I will definitely have a trigger warning for that if you don't want to hear that or hear discussions of it. But the entire episode does return back to the things that happened to her in episode 5, and moving on, then all of a sudden Armand shows up at their door, and in this scene, he's wearing this like cream colored suit. He looks great. Like, it's not to say that he looks bad. He looks fantastic. But this and another scene at the very end, I was like, why does he look like he's about to sing "Burning Down the House"? Like, very much so, like, very much so Talking Heads core. When I saw him on screen, in my mind, I was like, yeah, burning down the house. Looked very 80s. Like, his garb at this point looked very, very 80s, like big suit type of style. It was it was very funny. But Armand comes in their house, and he's basically, I guess, coming to visit Louis and in turn Claudia. And Claudia's very excited. And she's like, welcome to our lair and everything. And then this is when Armand is like, shouldn't you be at the theater? And Claudia's like, I've got 3 minutes. I've got time. And she's looking at him, and then he's like, who said you could look me in the eyes? Puce. I think it's like Puce or Puce. And that's like her hazing name. But the way in which he said that, I don't like that. I don't like that, actually. He didn't have to say it like that, but he was just like, who said you could look me in the eye? Whoa, okay. And he said this in front of Louis. And all Louis was like, oh, that's my bad. I was keeping her. Why don't you tell your boyfriend to ease up? Like, I get that this is like a hazing period and she has to go through this in order to get into this whack ass theater club. But just be like, you're not going to disrespect my sister in front of me. I don't care about what little practices y'all got, but like, not too much. So basically they go, like, Armand sends away Claudia to go to the theater to get ready for the show, and then him and Louis go on a walk, and this is Armand's, yet again a futile attempt to get Louis to join the Coven. Louis is very hesitant. He doesn't want to do that. He's like, I don't want to do this. It's not my thing. I'm not into it. I kind of want to go and do my own thing and be my own person and all this other stuff. At this point now, they mention Bruce, but both Armand and Louis know that they're both talking about Lestat. And at this point, Dreamstat shows up. So it's all three of them. And this is when I was like, oh, Armand can absolutely see Dreamstat as well. Or at least he knows that Louis is projecting. Like, he knows Lestat's presence is there because of Louis. Like, I don't know if he can actually see Dreamstat, if he's like ignoring him. I'm not really sure, but like, I'm of the assumption that Armand can probably see Dreamstat too. So they're talking, and Dreamstat shows up, and there's a moment when Louis like snaps a picture really quick, and like Armand is in it, but like, this is like the framing of it is where Dreamstat shows up, and so Louis quickly like pulls out his camera. And the assumption is that I think he was trying to see for himself if Dreamstat is real. Like, these hallucinations are becoming realer and realer and realer with every passing moment. Like, he's like, oh, shit, like, this is real. This is real. This is me. And then Armand is like, okay. And that's how I think that just let me know. I was like, oh, Armand can definitely see Dreamstat, and he knows why Louis did that. And then we cut back to present day, and they're kind of just like talking generally about their courtship. Meanwhile, Daniel sees the file that the Raglan guy put on his computer, and it's like Biblioteca Talamasca. And then all of these files start showing up. It's just a bunch of files and just a lot of information. And it's coming at you lightning speed. It's just like boop, 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 boop. It's showing up. And Daniel's getting like overwhelmed, and he's like, oh, what the fuck? And this is happening while Louis and Armand are talking, and Daniel's clearly getting flustered because he's peepaw at the computer trying to figure out like, what does all of this mean, and like, what is all of this? And then he gets like a private message from the Raglan guy being like, here to help, let me know. And at that point he gets a little bit distracted, and then Louis is like, Daniel, is everything okay? Like, are you good? we're kind of having a moment right now. We're talking and you're not listening. And then Daniel's like, yeah. So I was trying to figure out, what's up with Claudia at this point? What's happening with her? He's just bumbling through it. And I was like, real smooth, Daniel. Then we cut to the Théâtre des Vampires at another show, and Claudia's like she's like a little pledge, and she's being hazed right now, but she's like listening to the show, and it never gets old for her. She loves Santiago's performance, as do I, girl, as do I. Oh God, scrumptious man. I just can't get over it. Anyways, but she's like doing her little pledge stuff, and there's a point where the show ends and Santiago comes down, and Claudia is like, yeah, she's just like so enamored and really just deeply entrenched in the show, and she's asking him all these questions. Oh my God, I completely forgot the scene. Before Louis and Armand go on their walk, we are seeing Claudia at the theater where she's kind of learning, doing her little pledge things, and she talks to one of the people in the Coven who's like teaching her the kind of gross work of like, we put the body from the show in this box, and then this box has rats, and the rats eat the body pretty much. And then the person who she's talking to is just like,
on a Tuesday, this is the buddy box, and that's the rat box. On Wednesdays, that's the buddy box. This is the rat box. Back and forth, back and forth. Keep track. These rats are smart. They can go quiet. You open up the wrong box, they go running up the stairs, into the green room, into the theater, and Mitra punishes the entire Coven, which does not win your friends in Farron.
Which is a very funny scene. It was a small scene, but it was just very funny. So Claudia is talking to Santiago, and she, I think, did a little bit of snooping. Like, the assumption is that she kind of did a little bit of snooping around his station. I guess she's been instructed to like clean everyone's station and make sure it's nice and tidy, while she's an unpaid intern for this theater. And so she's asking him questions, and she's just like, she asks him questions about like, how do you get them to basically like be a scene partner and things like that. And so Santiago goes into his process and all these things. And the one thing that stood out to me was every other person in the theater is like doing the whole like puce thing, and like he does it too. But everyone's just like, eyes down, puce, like the whole thing is like she can't look at any of them in the eye. But she asked him, when she began to speak to him, she was like looking down and asking him, and he's like, oh, I'll never hear you from the front row if you don't look at me. And so she like kind of like timidly like looks up to him, and he like smiles, like he does a little wink, and I was like, oh my God, he's so hot. Anyways, but that was like, I know where we're going, but like I like Claudia and Santiago's interactions, because this whole scene kind of forges that they're a lot alike. Like, she tells him her like fake backstory of selling trinkets outside the train station, and that's how Louis found her, and all these different things, which is not consistent with the new version of the story that they came up with at the very end of that scene, the first scene we see with Claudia and Louis. So this story is all types of inconsistent. But then Santiago is just like, oh, you and me, we're a lot alike in that way. Like, you're an orphan, and now you're an orphan again. Basically meaning like, oh, your maker is dead too. My maker is also dead. And so then Claudia says like, oh, she's like, oh, who's Francis Naughton? And he was like, oh, the greatest Iago from the York Royal or something like that. And she was like, oh, that was you. So I guess that was his name before he was turned, was Francis Naughton. And then I guess someone gave him that new name of Santiago. So they kind of go into the conversation, and Santiago, I think as much as he likes Claudia, he is still digging for information to catch them in the lie that they've told to the Coven. I think everyone in the Coven but Armand and Santiago are of the mind that they are telling the truth, but Santiago is especially like hesitant to believe them, and Armand already knows the truth from Louis. So she's just like, Louis from Chicago, right? And Claudia, or Santiago's like, Louis from Chicago, right? And Claudia's just like, yeah, just outside of Chicago, Gary, Indiana. And he's like, okay. And he just seems like he's just collecting information. Like, he wants to catch them in this lie, essentially. So he's just continuing to catch information. And so the scene concludes with Santiago asking, what gifts did you get from your maker? And Claudia's like, oh, he taught me how to lie really good. And then Santiago's just like, like, you almost got it, Puce, like, you're almost there. And it's just, again, the double meanings of everything these characters say in this godforsaken show, because he wasn't talking about, oh, you're almost there with being inducted into our ranks and all these things. It just felt like he was like, oh, you're almost there with that lie. Like, I almost believe that. I didn't, but I almost believe that. So now we see Armand and Louis at the club, and they're basically just mainly talking about they're just talking about evil. And Louis is arguing that, like, everything about vampirism is evil, like, bar none, like, no ifs, ands, or buts. It is holistically, like, evil. And Armand is like, but aren't there gradations to evil? Like, aren't there levels to it? In the same way that there are levels to goodness. And while they're having this conversation, we then hear, come to me, like, you little whore. And it's fucking Dreamstat at the piano playing Come to Me, like a very different arrangement of Come to Me, where he's just making Louis feel so guilty. And again, this is a projection of his mind. So this is his guilt really manifesting. And he's just like, you little whore, like, you're only with him because you're blue about me. And then he said, I think he says, like, we ruin each other, impotent lovers. Like, he's heckling them while they're on this date. And so this is the point now where Louis fully comes out with it, that it was Lestat. Because at this point he's been maintaining, oh, it's Bruce, Bruce was my companion, Bruce was this, Bruce was that, Bruce is Lestat. And then Armand was like, I've known that for months, I just wanted you to say that. He was like, so what, you're gonna kill me now? Like, what's gonna happen? And Armand's basically is just like, did you not learn any of the vampire rules? Like, if you kill another vampire, like, yeah, you gotta die. And Louis is like, Lestat didn't teach me any of that. Like, I didn't know about any vampire rules. Like, I know about none of this. Like, he didn't teach me anything, which is very, very true. He taught him nothing. And Armand basically is like, yeah, you're probably gonna have to answer for those crimes. And so then Louise ass goes and says, well, what about Claudia? Oh my gosh, what about Claudia? Why would you say that? Because then Armand asks, well, did she kill him too? And then Louis is just like, no. And then Dreamstat is like, yeah. And if we're operating off the assumption that Armand can see Dreamstat, what are we doing? You shouldn't have even brought up Claudia. Like, oh my God. But it just pissed me off. It pissed me off so bad. I was like, Louis, why would you say her name? Why would you say her name? Don't even involve her. Like, just Louis, you piss me off sometimes. But then Armand is just basically like Louis starting to get, like, worked up because now they found out he's messed up their plan. Fuck this whole cover story. He's come out with it to Armand, which in turn comes out with it to the Coven. And Dreamstat is, like, kind of, antagonizing him while all of this is happening with his guilt and things like that. And he's just like, he told me you love me and all these things. Like, he's just really just piling on to Louis. And Louis is just like, to hell with you. And, like, you can tell that he kept Dreamstat in, I think, a somewhat manageable place up until this point. But this is the episode where all of that is beginning to break down a little bit. So from there, we get Louis, like, storming out of the, like, little cafe, like, club place that they were at, and he goes to the park where him and Armand first met, and he finds someone who at the beginning we see as a manifestation of Dreamstat, and they're, like, furiously making out, and Dreamstat's just like, kill me again. Your favorite thing to do is to kill me and do all this stuff. And so he's, like, banging Dreamstat up against the wall, and, like, like, you kiss him, just like like he's just, like, trying to kill him. And then we see Louis, like, furiously, like, he turns over whoever's body it was, and we just see it was just, like, a random guy. So, like, obviously Lestat was not there. And I was like, Louis, you need therapy and probably an antipsychotic. And so he goes home and he's like in his little dark room and he's trying to develop the picture that he took earlier with Armand and who he's thinking is also Lestat. And he's trying to see if Lestat was there. And it's like, he's not there, baby. He is not there, Pookie-rella. Like, he's just not. This is all in your mind. You're losing it a little bit. And so Claudia has no idea that any of this is happening, like, at all. And she's now, like, she was just like, you know what, you're right. Going back to their conversation earlier, she's like, you're right. I need to lay out all of the details of this so that we can best have our story straight and, you know, keep with it. Like, she has no idea that Louis has spilled the beans fully on everything that's happened. And so they're getting into their coffins, getting ready for bed. And Louis is like, hey, I have something to tell you. And Claudia kind of just, I think in her moment of vulnerability, she works up the courage to give more details about Bruce. And so at this point in the episode, I will put a timestamp right here for if you want to skip this discussion of Claudia talking about her abuser. She's worked up the courage. She's going to talk through to Louis about basically the full extent of what happened to her with Bruce. Now, I was under the assumption that it was that one time in the forest where they had met and everything, but apparently he like kept her under the floorboards and like abused her for like a week and broke her bones and all these things. And she goes into detail about it. And then she says, like, you know, I could deal with all of that, like the physical parts of it, but what really fucked me up was him saying I love you before, during, after, before, during, after. Like that's the part that fucked me up the most. And I'm really at war with myself about how I feel about the scene, because on the one hand, I understand why they're I guess revisiting this part of Claudia's story. But then on the other hand, I'm like, she's endured just so much, and every episode is another way in which we see just the extent of which she's been failed and the extent to which she's being set up and the extent to which she's not really being cared for in the way that she deserves, and just her not getting her happy existence as a vampire. Like, her happiness is so fleeting that it feels, the only word I can use is wrong, to go back to that storyline that already was incredibly controversial in season 1. I remember a lot of the discourse around it was interesting, because it was a lot of people, and I included in this group, who felt like it was a kind of a gross use of the woman gets sexually assaulted to become tougher trope that we see in media a lot of the times. And it just was them kind of rehashing it, albeit in a less graphic way, but still in a way that is incredibly vivid in its detail of what happened. I understood why they did it narratively, I guess, but I just wasn't really a fan of it. But then the other half of me is like, it was a very beautifully performed piece. It's a very beautiful bit of vulnerability from Claudia, who I think tries to put on the best face that she can and brave the world as this, you know, woman in this very specific plight. And she is trying her best to keep hope and keep the faith of her existence, but it's difficult, and these are the moments when it becomes the most difficult. And Delaney Hales' performance of that scene really is proof positive of that. Like, it's so just devastating. It's heartbreaking. It is, you can't help but feel so like awful for a character like Claudia, because she's constantly going and getting like just shit hurled at her. And this was a moment where we didn't understand the depths of which we find out what happened to her. And then we do, and it's just like, fuck, you know. I don't really have much to say about this scene, because I again, narratively understand why it happens. I understand why they did it, but just knowing the everything that Claudia has been through, the everything that she will go through, it just feels like this continuous this continuous onslaught of stuff happening to her, these continuous bouts of abuse that she is at the hands of in every single way, this continued disrespect, this continued neglect, she is this show's punching bag in a way, whether they mean to or not. And it just, sometimes it becomes a little bit tiresome to constantly see her face this brutal existence. It just seems like her plight is just so much different than everyone else's, and it's tough. It's tough. It was a tough watch. It's a tough read, and I'm still wrestling with its effectiveness. So after that scene, she basically concludes it by being like, they're going to initiate me into the Coven. Talking to Louis, and she's like, I'd really love for you to be there. And so Louis is like, I wouldn't miss it for the world. So we're back at the theater, and this is the last scene of the episode where Claudia is basically, she gets initiated into the Coven, and it's so, again, these moments of fleeting happiness that we see from Claudia. She's so excited to be initiated into this group, and she thinks she's found this community and these people who really care about her, and she's like, on stage helping, and you see her like smile out to Louis, and he's just like, very happy, again, knowing that he foiled all of their plans to Armand, but he's just trying to put on a good face. Meanwhile, our Santiago's doing what Lestat did at the top of the episode, wherein he's talking to Armand telepathically, and Santiago is like, so there was a body discovered in the forest, and it was like mutilated and had puncture wounds, and it wasn't any of us, and I don't think it was Claudia, it was Louis. He's a problem. You need to get rid of him. And our mom was like, okay, well, like, is it just you that thinks that, or like, does everyone think that? And then everyone from the Coven looks to him to be like, we all think it. You need to get rid of him. And so Armand is like, okay, chill. I'll get rid of him after the ceremony. Like, will that make everyone happy? So the ceremony starts of initiating Claudia. And, they go through like, oh, like, you're one of us now. They gift her a flea circus. Don't piss me off. Because I think puce, I don't know if it's French for flea. I'm not really sure. But they gift her a flea circus, and then they're like, oh, don't forget where you started from and all these things. I was just like, oh, y'all are so nasty. So nasty and so rude. Basically, Santiago officially initiates her by reading the 5 laws of vampirism while Louis and Armand go for a little walk in the sewers. And basically, the 5 rules are, number 1, each coven must have its leader, and only he may order the working of the dark gift upon a mortal. Law 2, the dark gifts must never be given to the crippled, the maimed, or to children. So obviously one of those already broken. Number 3, no vampire must commit to writing the history of the vampire. Both of them already broke that one. Actively, that's what this whole show is about. Number 4, no vampire shall ever expose his or her true nature to a mortal and let the mortal live. Again, already doing that. And then number 5, no vampire may ever destroy another vampire except the leader of the coven has reign over his flock. Like, he has the power of life or death over all of his flock. So those are the 5 rules. And now if you listen to those rules and you're like, they have all broken all 5 rules multiple times, you would be correct. You would be correct. They've all broken those rules. So while Louis and Armand are in the sewer, basically Armand is just like, hey, I know the situation, and now I kind of gotta kill you because of that. And Louis is like, just protect Claudia, like, just make sure she's good. And then Armand says something which is just so foreboding and scary. He says, Claudia, like, you don't need to worry about Claudia, she doesn't have that much time left. And Louis is like, what? And Armand's like, well, yeah, like, her brain at the rate that it's going, like, she's not going to be able to handle the burden of existence. Like, she's going to forever be in this plight that she's in, and that's going to eventually break her to where she will end her own existence. That's what he was trying to allude to. But if you know where we're going, something else is probably going to happen. And so Louis is just like, oh, shit. And so at this point, they're in the sewer, and like Armand kind of has, I think he's got like the fire gift or whatever. So he's got like a fireball in his hand, and I guess the thought is she's just gonna like set Louis on fire. And so Louis is just like, just make sure Claudia's okay, like all this stuff. And Armand's like, she won't be. Basically, they're probably gonna kill her, but he doesn't tell Louis that. And Louis is just like, she's strong and she can handle a lot. And Armand's like, no, she can't. I've seen it all before. I've seen it happen. I've been around. I've seen so much. Basically, then there's a point where Louis is thinking like, oh, it's going to happen. And he's just like, every morning, tell her that she's beautiful every single morning. And talking about Claudia. And it's just, again, it's the double-edged sword of Louis, where I'm just like, oh, sometimes I'm like, you care so much about Claudia. And then sometimes I'm like, you don't care enough. You don't care enough about her, and it drives me nuts. But ultimately, then Louis thinks the fireball's coming for him, and then it's not. It's Armand, and he like moves the little manhole cover, and he basically just walked him home, and Armand spares him. The Coven thinks that Armand went out to kill Louis, and he didn't do that. And they share their first kiss or whatever. It's a bit of a jarring thing that they kiss, and then Louis goes and it's just like, oh, do you want to come upstairs? I was like, Louis, you just heard that Armand and the Coven have plans to kind of destroy Claudia too, and now you're like, I'm horny. What is wrong with you? Like, what is wrong with you? And like, spliced between that moment, the Coven reveals to Claudia like her new role in the theater, and they like wrote a new play for her, and the play is that she plays a baby. And she's just like, oh fuck, like I'm playing a baby. She's met with this same fate that she was trying to get away from. She thought that the theater would afford her this freedom from this existence that she's been dealt. She thought that she would find community who understand her and get her and treat her like a woman, treat her like the woman that she is, not the child, but they still see her as this child. And she like looks at the costume and the dress and everything that she's given, and she looks at it in horror. And then the episode ends, like it doesn't end with that. It ends with Louis and Armand going to punch in their apartment, I guess. As you could tell from this recap part of the review, I didn't love this episode all that much. Now, be it, I liked it a lot more on a second watch. I think I understood what they were trying to do a little bit more, but ultimately I found it to be a lot. Like, it was a lot, and not like a lot in opulence thing, not a manageable a lot, but a lot in the sense of like it was a bit messy at times. I think the information that they gave to the audience was very interesting. The thing that I tweeted initially after watching the first time last night was, this was definitely an episode for the book readers. Like, this was an episode for the fans of the book, because they do bring in things from the Vampire Lestat. And one of my concerns was I just don't want the show to, because I know that some of the showrunner, Roland Jones, has expressed interest in wanting to get to the Vampire Lestat and adapt it. And I just want to make sure that we are giving as much, reverence and credence and respect to where we are in the story now. Like, we are finishing telling the story that involves these characters, because, I know Lestat is alluring. I understand that he is this very alluring figure, and he has been this very alluring figure, and in the grand scheme of the Vampire Chronicles, he is, kind of the main character. But the show, I think, has gone out of its way to adapt and to make the characters around Lestat so much more interesting than they've really ever been. Louis feels so new and lively and fresh, and he feels so like he's got this really invigorated feeling to him, and the same with Claudia, and like the things that they've changed about the characters, the things that they've honored about the characters from the books, like they've just really reinvented these characters. And it would just be a shame if we were kind of just like trying to run to the finish line of this story just to get to that story. You know what I mean? And that is a bit of my concern at this point with this episode in bringing in information from the next book this early, because we're not even technically at the halfway point of the season yet. Like this is the third episode in, and we're already talking about the vampire Lestat. And I think there's a lot of discussions, and there's a lot of things that you can talk about with the element of race and in changing these characters and making them different characters of color, and ultimately infusing race into the narrative and into the storyline. I am always on my guard of like, I just want to make sure that these characters of color aren't treated as collateral just so we could get to the white main character that everyone loves. Like I said, I am a fan. I think Lestat is an incredibly interesting character. I think Sam Reed's performance of him is obviously incredibly alluring, and people want to see more of it and hear him and just see how his Lestat begins to blossom and unfold. But at the same time, I do hold space of being a little bit of holding a little bit of trepidation with, I see the direction we're headed in. I'm hoping that we're not heading in a direction that kind of just bulldozes over these other characters just to get to him. And a little bit of this episode kind of felt like that. I don't think that feeling is too pervasive. I think ultimately it does offer some background on Armand, which I think was necessary. It does, satisfy that bit of it. But I was very curious just after the initial watch. I was like, how is this going to read to audiences who know nothing of the books and really know nothing of the movie, the people who are coming in and getting this lore of these characters in this world in real time? Because we got not only Armand's background, we got more of Lestat's background, we got the Talamasca, like we got a lot of information, and it was moving at breakneck speed. Like it just felt like we were flying through this episode. Like the pacing of it was a bit too quick for me, and I don't know where I can't really pinpoint where exactly it was causing this like rapid like fire succession. And maybe like each scene we didn't really stay in one place for too long. Maybe it was the dialogue. I really don't know, but I just found this episode like we were zooming, and this was not an episode where we needed to zoom. Like we needed to kind of sit with some of this this information for just like 2 seconds longer. Ultimately, it just felt like we were trying to like, they were like, all right, here's a lot of information, okay, go. And I would hope like we won't really know the effectiveness of this episode until the next episode, until we see the payoff of these things, to ultimately see kind of what direction they're heading in. And ultimately, I think just in the grand scheme of the show, it's not one of my favorite episodes that I've ever seen. I don't think that it's like straight up bad, but it is. I think it was gutsy to introduce some of those elements from the vampire Lestat. I think they were maybe introduced a little bit too early, because it invites a precedent that could be a bit dangerous to the grand scheme of the show. I think in the way of a TV show, it, in the ways that it usually succeeds in that, I think it fell a little bit short this week. I think the book readers are going to have a field day with it, but ultimately if we're moving in the direction of it being a one-to-one adaptation, I think that's going to alienate the television viewership of it, which there are a lot of people, contrary to popular belief, there are a lot of people who are coming into the show having known nothing of these characters, never seen the movies, never read the books. Like these are brand new characters to them. And the ways in which they understand them are in the context that the show provides. And I don't want them to head in the direction of alienating that crowd just to satisfy the crowd that like wants to see this specific book be adapted. I don't think that it's a bad thing that they want to adapt the vampire Lestat, because personally I'm very much so like chomping at the bit for them to get to Queen of the Damned, because I would like to see Akasha. But I just want, no matter what story it is, I just want that story to really be given the chance to live a full life, have a full life cycle, have the ability for us to sit with these characters and sit with the story and sit with the themes, and then we move on to the next one, you know, to like create that experience, because these stories are worth that. With the whole arc of Claudia's sexual abuse, I, like I said at that point in the episode, or in the video, I was just kind of like, I'm wrestling with its necessity in the grand narrative of both the episode and the season so far. I was trying to see if there was another way that they could have gone about that and maybe satisfied what her arc was supposed to be in this episode a little bit more. I'm sitting with it. I'm sitting with, was it necessary to do that? You know, like nothing in a story is you know, super necessary all the time, but I think with this specifically, I was like, did we need this? I'm of the mind that I don't think that they did, but narratively speaking, we don't know the full payoff of any of these choices until the season is over, pretty much. So ultimately, you know, like I said, wasn't my favorite episode of the show, wasn't my favorite episode of the season by far, would probably be my least favorite of the season so far. But I can only hope that the show will, in the next episode, I'm trusting the narrative. I'm trusting to sit with it and be like, okay, let's just see where you're going with this. Like, I just want to see kind of where you're heading with this before I can cast full judgment, yay or nay. I think it's never a bad thing to voice when things give you pause, or things are like, I don't really know if I love that, or I don't really love that choice. And ultimately, that's the greatness of media, whether it be a book, whether it be a movie, whether it be this TV show, where we are getting in much more like detail what these characters are going through and their thoughts and the different themes and all these things. There is room for a discussion of many things. I don't think there's an objective truth here. This is solely my opinion. I'm not denouncing the show or anything like that. This was just not an episode that I loved. But you know, one episode out of, at this point, 10 that I may not have enjoyed is a pretty solid track record. So it's fine. And don't forget to like and subscribe and comment and share and do all the things that YouTubers say to do. I'd love to hear what you thought about this week's episode. You know, did you like it? Did you not like it? Were there things that you liked? Were there things that you didn't like? I want to know it all. I want to hear it. We'll just have a discussion in the comment section. You guys are so funny and fun and informative in the comment section. So let's just keep it going. But yeah, don't forget that I am Bobby. This is Culture Kitsch. I don't have an outro, but I'll see you next week.